Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for showing up in this rather dreich day, as we would call it in Scotland. It's intranslatable. I will not attempt to translate that. It is not good. So I want to talk about Evade Conti and inject a little bit of secularity into some of the normal proceedings. I wish to advocate the importance of the Middle French poem Les Échecs d'Amour and the glosses in Latin and the commentary in Middle French that were made about it. We think that the original poem, Les Échecs d'Amour, was written around 1377, so late 14th century, and it draws and rewrites quite a lot of the romance of the Rose, and it tries to rewrite the Rose in many ways. It pulls away from it, but it tries to make much of the material in the Rose more respectable. So Christine de Pisa could not have complained of it, as she did of the Rose, that it had failed to leave the reader with clear ethical instruction by failing to conclude in favour of the moral way of life. There's a very, very long conclusion in favour of the moral way of life in the Échecs d'Amour, the poem and the commentary thereon. A few words about the manuscripts. The most complete manuscript is, it's rather sad. This is the result of water damage following the Allied bombing of Dresden. The manuscript lay in water for several days, and it is severely damaged and, as it were, literally washed out, as you can see. However, recently, with the aid of multispectral photography, more has been recovered of the final part of it than was ever thought possible. So we have an extremely large edition of it now, which is about thick, about 800 pages, by Gregory Hayworth et al. That's been published by Brill a few years ago, that I can warmly recommend. It includes the Latin glosses and a translation by Frank Coulson of those Latin glosses, so it's a very good thing to have. But we still have some of the end part of it still illegible, so hopefully with better technology we'll be able to read all of it. But however, even if we get to the end of the Dresden manuscript, it'll be still incomplete. I mean, here are just a few other pages. You can see this is from early on in the text. It gets much, much worse as one reads through it. Now, the only other surviving manuscript, apart from a small fragment contained in a Harvard anthology, is this one. A rather depressing photograph, I know, but it's all I could get hold of. It seems to be roughly the same date as the Dresden manuscript, but it's got glosses in Latin in several hands, and it explains at some length what some of the chess pieces, this is the chess of love, some of the chess pieces mean, which is a very good thing, because otherwise we wouldn't know what the heck they meant. The poem doesn't tell us, which is one of my main points here. So anyway, a team of scholars working on an edition of the Evade Conti Middle French translation of the Problemata of Aristotle. This is an autographed manuscript. Compared the handwriting with the glosses in the Venice manuscript, and they have argued conclusively, I believe, that it's the same hand. So the main glossing hand in the Venice manuscript of the poem, that is Evade Conti, who also wrote this long translation of the pseudo-Aristotelian Problemata. Evade Conti, who was the physician to King Charles V, was also an extremely erudite commentator. The commentary on the Problemata is very extensive. It features material from Peter of Urbano, who was the big commentator on this pseudo-Aristotelian work. Now, the question has arisen and has been discussed at some length as to whether the Échecs d'Amour was written by Evade Conti. Okay, he wrote some of the glosses in the Venice manuscript. He wrote the Échecs d'Amour Moralise, more which in a moment, the full-length commentary. But did he write the poem? The Venice manuscript has been called, with some plausibility, a working copy. And the argument is that the Latin glosses are the beginning of a process which ended up in the big full-length commentary, the Shechamera Moralise. Some call it a moralized Shechamera, some call it a commentary, but it's all the same thing. Now, when we move to the Shechamera Moralise, things become aesthetically much more pleasing. You'll be relieved to hear, having looked at the manuscripts of the poem. We're looking at this. There are 7 manuscripts of the Shechamera Moralise, and several of them are fantastically illuminated. Here is Loktor in bed, having his dream vision. Here is Mars. Now, they get Mars's chariot wrong, don't they, always? It's not a farm cart, it's a chariot, right? And I've quoted Pierre Bressuire's Vidius Moralisatus because Bressuire is a source of both the poem and the commentary on the poem, and the mythography is here being put into graphic form. So then that's just a close-up of Mars in his cart. Here is Venus, and again, it follows the common mythographic explanation, and I've quoted Pierre Bressuire again. And here is a close-up of Venus and the 3 Graces. Here is my favorite. Now, this is fun. Here is Jupiter throwing thunderbolts at the giants, but here we have a seraphim who is handing up bombs to the god, and the god is then throwing them at the giants, and I just think that's so funny. Okay, I think there's real humor in that illumination. Here you are, sir. This may work very well. Try this bomb. It's better than the last one. Here is another. Here is the underworld, the pagan underworld. A fantastic entire page devoted to that. And here is a close-up. So here you have the denizens of the underworld. Amazing. I'm now moving on to a second manuscript of the Shechamera Moralise, again illuminated. So this is a BNF Francais 143, and again, okay, pity about the cart in which Mars is riding, but exquisite illuminations, and there's a rather extreme depiction of Saturn there, being castrated and then eating his children, which I don't have time to get into, fortunately. Here are the 3 Graces, and here is Cupid. And here is the pagan underworld again. Here is a pagan hellmouth, which is just truly amazing. Now, okay, the point that I'm making here is that while the poem itself received a very patchy reception, the commentary on it, the Shechamera Moralise, was picked up and became the subject for the most exquisite illumination. But let's get back to the poem for a moment. What's it about? Lecture, the first-person narrator of the Eshek, is presented as experiencing in his youth a springtime vision of the goddess Nature, who tells him about the 2 paths. One is the path of reason, and the other is the path of sensuality. He then meets Mercury and the goddesses Venus, Juno, and Pallas, and we have a reenactment of the judgment of Paris. And of course, unsurprisingly, he chooses Venus and gives her the award of the Golden Apple. She sets him on the way to the Garden of Delight. En route, he meets Diana, who is very critical of his rather bad choice. But then he enters the Garden of Light, which is basically a locus amenis, an elaborate love garden, and he finds Delight herself playing at chess with the lady. This kind of transmutes into him playing at chess with the lady, and he is checkmated by her, which means that he falls madly in love with her. Then he's given instruction in the Ars Amatoria, lots of translation of Ovid here. And then, having got all this instruction, he then looks for his lady again, only to encounter Pallas, who is not terribly thrilled with how things have gone so far, and she explains to him at great length why he has chosen the wrong path and he should choose the life of reason. Pallas being the goddess of wisdom, prudence, and reason, as Christine de Pizan, of course. So she explains the conflict between the passionate life and the life of reason, offering him the principles according to which he should live his life. Now, there are many, many folios after this, in the poem we're still talking about. And what happens is that we have a shift from the Remedium Amoris. There's a long translation of Ovid's Remedies of Love, and then we move into a long translation of Giles of Rome's De Regimini Principum. So much so that even one could say the title, The Chess of Love, it's a mistitling, because a large percentage of the poem is not about chess at all. The chess game has been left far behind. Anyway, here, now here then I move to the Echec Moralise, and I've got the Conte's exposition of the poem. The principal intention of the author, and the fact, you will recognize these terms from the Acessus ad Auctores, of course, the Intentio Autoris and Finis are being applied here, is to flee, basically, from the evil and to follow the good, and to flee from all false idleness. And we're told here that the author makes a lot up. We have to primarily say that the author, in the aforementioned rhyme, he feigns, he makes it up. Many of things that should not be understood according to the letter, they shouldn't be read literally. And this is perfectly reasonable, he says, because fiction has got its advantages. A proper moral author can use fiction, and he then defends his choice of fictional devices. He explains that certain things, as I say, are not to be taken literally. Because of this, the poet feigns and introduces several characters. And here we have the application of Latin persona theory to the French poem. In the manner of feigning, the manière qu'il est fin, used in the Romance of the Rose. And no doubt one can sometimes feign and speak figuratively and in fable in a way which is beneficial and to a good end. So one can parler par figure et fabuleusement, and this can be justified in moral terms. This account is echoed at the end of Valdecanti's commentary. He says the poet wished to show secretly by the game of chess how in his youth he was, well, it's his persona rather than him, you know. He was taken and moved by the love of a young girl. However, what he says about having been checkmated should not be understood as meaning that in reality he was maddened and overcome by love. Oh no, he made this up to take the occasion for speaking of love better, more pleasantly, and more beautifully. In this way, his material is made more pleasant and agreeable to many people. This feigning was also done to show better the error and deception that exist in mad, passionate love, and the great innumerable dangers in which those who excessively indulge in it place themselves. The author's principal intention and end are to reprehend and blame their folly as being contrary to reason. So a clear moral objective. Now, how does he pursue this? Well, basically, he attacks Andreas Capellanus. Back when I was a grad student, Andreas Capellanus, the book of Courtly Love, as it was then called, was the big text that everybody was discussing. There was much debate about this, but I think that's all been left behind. But anyway, Andreas was really a big deal in the early history of discussion of Courtly Love, Finamore. Despite the fact that there were very, very few manuscripts circulating. So C.S. Lewis especially was very enthusiastic about disproving that Courtly Love was essentially adulterous. That was the line. But then people began to say, but who read it? Now, the answer is at least two people read it. One was Jean de Mion, and the other was Evald de Conti. And so clearly Evald de Conti thinks that Evald de Conti and his quotation in the Romance of the Rose, that's what he has to beat, as it were. That's the primary problem he has to face up when he's trying to reconcile love with the moral way of life. Here we have the famous passage from the Romance de la Rose, where we have love being described really as a mental illness, a maladie de pensée, which is according to the sage philosophers. Now, Andreas is called a sage philosopher, which may indicate that he didn't know, hey, the guy's only 12th century, he's not all that sage, but we just don't know what Everard thought about the authorship or the De Amore of Andreas. We just don't know. But as I say, he's quoted as a stage philosopher. So then Reason in the Romance quotes Andreas, and Everard critiques both Andreas and the Romance of the Rose. He's extremely respectful of the Rose, by the way, at all points. If you had to put him on one side of the Querelle de la Rose, he would definitely have been one of those in favour of the Rose. I think that's pretty clear. But he attacks the idea that in Andreas, love must be freely given and the lovers must be free to give it. This is the famous argument, of course, in Andreas that got everybody very upset in criticism of the middle of the last century. The point being is that love must be given freely. If you are married, you cannot give the love freely anymore. It becomes an obligation. So true love is incompatible with marriage because of the mastery, as Chaucer would call it, the signorie of dominance which a husband exercises over his wife. Now, it's not that Everard attacks Andreas, whom he doesn't name, by the way. He doesn't attack him directly. He rather throws a lot of other authorities at the problem. Yeah. So we have a bit of a conflict between different authorities, but it's quite clear which are the authorities that are the dominant ones. Here is his declaration that while arguably, yes, it's difficult to reconcile true love with marriage, on the other hand, in marriage, one can accomplish better, more freely, and legally all of the pleasures of love. Here they are, the least mixed with sorrow. He goes on to say that a man of good status should desire a good wife and take pains to ensure that he has one. She will be his life companion and with him engaged in the natural and virtuous act of generation. The state of marriage is a divine thing, and in it there can be no more divine or worthy thing, than to engender descendants in an honest and good wife. For by engendering his like, a man becomes immortal and divine. Aristotle says this. Whereupon you say, what? Aristotle says this? Well, here's what he's working off. Here are a couple of extracts, which of course he elaborates very complexly. The first one is from the Politics, where we're told there must be a union of those who cannot exist without each other, namely of male and female. The rest may continue. And this is a union which is formed not for choice, but because, in common with other animals and with plants, mankind has a natural desire to leave behind them an image of themselves. And then in De Anima, for any living thing that has reached its normal development, the most natural act is the production of another like itself, an animal producing an animal, a plant to plant, in order that, as far as its nature allows, it may partake in the eternal and divine. That is the goal towards which all things strive, that for the sake of which they do whatsoever their nature renders possible. Now, when Aristotle speaks of partaking in the eternal and divine, he's talking about perpetuity. Yeah, individual members of a race will die, but the species will go on, and that is a kind of eternity. Yeah, but of course the Christian readers of that are inclined to regard eternity in somewhat a different way. Here is then a passage from the Ethics, which goes beyond that. This is a separation of humankind from other animals. The love between husband and wife is accepted as a natural thing. The family is identified as the primary social unit. Man is a social animal, and the household, the familia, is the primal social unit. And the family, it's an older and more fundamental thing, that is the state. Further, human beings differ from other animals in that they cohabit not only to get children, but to provide what is necessary for a fully lived life. It is generally agreed, Aristotle says, that conjugal affection, and here I'm quoting the real Aristotle, it is generally agreed that conjugal affection combines the useful with the pleasant. Furthermore, marriage may also embody a moral ideal when husband and wife are virtuous persons. Now, this is amplified in a text that has not received the attention it deserves, the economics for which read household management. So do Aristotle, but there's a lot of the real Aristotle in there, and indeed there may be more of the real Aristotle in there than some people have thought. This amplifies the ideas I have just described. Nothing says, and also I'm quoting Nicola Rem's fantastic commentated translation of the Economics. He does a fine translation of from the Latin into French, but he also adds glosses as well. Indeed, Nicola Rem is arguably the person who did more for vernacular commentary in French at the end of the Middle Ages than any other single human being. Extraordinary achievement. Okay, Nicola Rem then on the Economics. The text says the nature of man and a woman was ordained or preordained by God to live together as a divine partnership. That's his translation in French. And the gloss says, and this accords with human nature, for which God has a special solicitude and attention. That's according to Aristotle. Marriage is divinely ordained. And he agrees with the statement of our Saviour that God made this union, what therefore God hath joined together, etc. So therefore, we have the revelation that Aristotle and Christ agree completely on this matter. In Rem's commentary on his translation of the Economics, there is much more quotation from the Bible. In Evadicanti's commentary on the Eshek, there's hardly anything from the Bible. It's very lay, very, very secular indeed. He uses Pierre Bossuet's Vidius Moralisatis, but when Bossuet moves into a Christianized religious reading of a fable, he will cut that out, and he will stay with all the lay material. He stays with the secular material. Okay. What emerges then from Evadicanti's commentary and from the original poem itself, insofar as we can piece that together, is the idea that for the vie active, marriage is a foundation. The active life really basically depends on marriage, or marriage is the foundation of the good active life. Now, he does not criticize the contemplative life. He says that's quite special. I'm just talking about the active life here, the, as it were, regular life of men in society who are ordinary men, and for them, marriage is very highly desirable, and good marriage is the best thing possible that a man can do. Marry a good wife, it will be a virtuous marriage and beget children and bring them up according to good moral precepts. Now, so that I think is a large measure of the success of the Eshek Moralise, a large measure of Evadicanti's success, that he can reconcile economic, good household management, and amour. And it's done not so much with trying to piece them all together and come out with the debating process and the final conclusion, but by juxtaposing authorities against each other, but it being made very clear that Aristotle is the real major authority here, and we go with Aristotle because he's the one who, according to this, advocates marriage as being an essential part of the active life, which is a foundational aspect of that form of life. Now, okay, so that's basically my little summary of what I've just said, that this is wholly consonant with Evard's education and ambitions. The young aristocrats, who clearly are his target audience, are being advised to love honourably and marry well, thereby avoiding excesses of carnal delight, which cause damage to both body and soul. Okay, so much for the achievement. Major problem about the commentary, the Eshek Moralise, is that it seems to end very, very abruptly indeed. And this has caused its readers all kinds of issues. Here's what happens. We're told that Pallas spoke to him at great length. This is when he encounters Pallas, you recall. He's on his way to the Garden of Love. Everything seems very clear. And then Pallas says, no, you made the wrong choice. And this is the point at which Evard brings the comedy to an end. And there's a rapid summary of what else happens, even though the poem's got hundreds of folios still to go, okay? Pallas spoke to him at great length of the contemplative life, and also of the active life, which includes in itself many diverse estates, which are all good, honourable, and lawful to hold, for one who knows how to practice it well. And the Lady Pallas taught and showed him many beautiful teachings and many good things profitable to behaviours and to honest life, and which it would be good to explain here, but for a certain cause, I will keep silence about this for the present. And that's it. We have some verses which contain an acrostic containing Evade de Conti's name, which is why we know for sure that Evade wrote the commentary. And that's it. So, as Othello once remarked, what is the cause? There are several possible reasons for this. Now, either that phrase means for a particular reason, a specific explanation which is being implied but not provided. Okay, he's being a bit coy, you know. It could be one of those vague things for various reasons, just a kind of a casual throwaway phrase. I have other things to do. In one of the verses that follow this ending, he says that his ship has to sail elsewhere. Okay. One other theory, and this is from the editors of the Camera Moralise, Bruno Roy and Francois Gistin-Tesson. They argue that the cause has been made certain. Because the cause has been made certain, there's therefore there's no reason to say any more, okay? Because everything has already been made clear, so why therefore add more commentary to it? I myself balk at that reading of the French, and some of my friends in medieval French studies agree with me that that's a bit of a strange way to read that phrase. But setting that aside, I would offer this sort of weaker version of that argument, so to speak, which is that Evade's silence is appropriate because the original text has at this point rendered the gloss redundant because of its explicit didacticism. You know, a commentary is useful when the text is problematic. Once the text stops being problematic, once we get into Giles of Rome, why bother? Because the text is its own commentary. The text has got so moral that the commentary can't do anything else except repeat some things, and that would be really anodyne. But you might say, is it easier to assume, though, that we're not dealing with the same person here, that the commentator, Evade, is not the same as the poet? Maybe he had begun to write the commentary on the on the Échec de Mort, the poem, and he thought, oh, that's fine, I don't have a full copy at the moment, but I'll get a fuller copy. But he never got the fuller copy, and so he was stuck when he came to the incomplete copy. And do bear in mind, we do not have a single complete copy extant of the entire poem. Okay, there are just three fragments. According to Gregory Hayworth, who deserves huge credit for editing, for being the lead editor of the poem, he thinks that the reason why we have the abrupt ending is that Evade didn't know what came next. He wasn't the author, he didn't know what came next, okay? So he had to stop. In particular, he was ignorant of the outcome of the relationship between the actor and his beloved. Surely, says Gregory, if he were the author and therefore knew what was going to happen next, as a good commentator, he would have said, by the way, this is what happens next. This is the outcome of the relationship between L'Auteur and his beloved. Well, okay, we're not dealing with a narrative here. This is not your regular love story, which ends with consummation or with death. Okay, as soon as Giles of Rome kicks in, it's a foregone conclusion how it's going to end. You know, you don't have to spell it out. It's going to be heavily, heavily moral. The other point that Gregory makes is that the general unauthorliness or lack of discrimination in the commentator's mindset shows that he was not the author. This notion of unauthorliness. Gregory feels that there's a long explication of the rêverie, the spring scene at the beginning of the poem, and the Evade goes on and on and on about the rêverie, the spring opening. And so Gregory says if he was the author, he wouldn't have spent so long doing that. This must be a rather boring commentator who's not getting on to the really obscure bits. Well, I don't buy that either, because if an author is writing as a commentator, they act like a commentator. And so if any regular medieval commentary will spend as long on some of the rather boring stuff, frankly, or the more conventional stuff, than they will on the more obscure stuff. A good commentator will be comprehensive, will not attempt to discriminate in terms of what is really major, to the extent of hardly saying anything about something which is purely conventional. And of course, we all know about the spring openings and the spring garden scenes of medieval love poetry, but from the point of view of a commentator, that requires a certain degree of exegesis, and so he's getting on with it. So therefore, I don't think that those arguments really hold water. Yeah, I don't think you can say that this is not authorly, and therefore the same person cannot be the commentator and the author of the poem. A poet writes in one way, a commentator writes in a different way. And now, here I move on to my arguments for the common authorship. So I'm arguing henceforth that either there is one author of both the poem and the commentary, as well as the Latin glosses in the Venice manuscript, or there is simply a group of people, maybe friends together, who are working on the project together. I don't rule that out. But let's try the argument that there's just one and the same person here. Now, the problem is, you see, that when you get in the poem to the enumeration of the chess pieces, there are some pieces for the man and some for the woman, and each chess piece bears a shield, and on the shield there is an emblem, there is a symbol on the shield. And I'm just looking at some of the ladies' poems here. Now, the symbols linked to the lady are the crescent moon, the rose, the lamb, the rainbow, the ring, the serpent, the panther, and the eaglet. Now, it takes little effort to deduce that the rose is a symbol of female beauty, yeah? But some of the other images are far from obvious. So my argument here is that some of these choices are so eccentric, yeah, that it really took the author of the poem to know what they meant, because here's the thing, we're just told that the symbols do exist on the shields. In the poem itself, there's no explanation. You have to, if you've got a copy of the Venice manuscript, look at the Latin glosses. The Latin glosses explain what those images mean, okay? And these are in the hand of Evade de Conti, these same explanatory Latin glosses. And those same glosses are repeated and elaborated in the French commentary, the Échec amoureux moralisé. So I hope that makes sense. My argument really fundamentally is, spoiler alert, that these choices of symbol require explication. So either, it really took an author to really understand them, or a close friend of the author to understand them. But how would this have worked in a performance if they'd been so obscure? The idea is, and I think every critic of the poem seems to accept this, at least, if nothing else, that there would have been a performance of the poem and somebody would have explained what the symbol meant. So there would have been an ongoing commentary. Maybe the reading of the poem would have been interrupted by somebody saying, by the way, the symbol means so-and-so. Or there would have been a pause, a coffee break, and somebody would have said, by the way, those symbols mean, and you would have had an ongoing exegesis of the those mysterious things, those sort of mysteries, as Evade de Conti calls them in the poem. So I believe there's a clear continuity of purpose here, from the poem, these obscure symbols, to the Latin glosses which explain them, to the fuller explanations which occur in the full-length French commentary. Okay, and I think, applying Occam's razor, I think it's not unreasonable to assume that there's one person who is responsible for all of this. So there is a chess of love enterprise, so to speak, which is driven and directed by one person, or with a few friends, Evade de Conti. Okay, let's get into some of the symbols. The panther is one of the lady's poems. Is one of the images on the shield of one of the poems. Bonté, goodness, is signified by the panther, whose skin is decorated with many colors and whose smell is very sweet, and therefore all animals naturally follow it gladly. It is also a gentle animal, so hence we see a rather soppy panther on the left of your screen, only unfriendly to serpents. So too the virtuous and goodly woman is adorned with many good qualities. She sends out a most pleasant odour because of her reputation. So true about other things. That's one of the Latin glosses from the commentary in the Venice manuscript. Okay, so then sweet breath, and here we see a panther emanating its sweet breath. Many colours, friendly to other animals, and except the serpent. So here is a serpent rather unconvincingly trying to hide from the panther. No, putting your head in there won't help me. Here is my favourite from the Aberdeen vestry. You see the serpent trying to hide in a cave here to the right, and all the other animals really enjoying hanging out with the panther. So now this, of course, comes from the physiologist tradition, where the panther, we're told, is a friend of all animals, but is an enemy of the dragon. He is intensely variegated and is beautiful like Joseph's cloak. And David said in Psalm 44, "At your right hand stands the queen in a golden dress, decked in various shoes," etc. The panther is quiet and a most exceedingly mild animal. If, however, he has eaten and is satisfied, he falls asleep immediately in his lair and arises from his sleep on the third day, like our Saviour. If the panther awakens from his sleep on the third day, he roars out in a loud voice, and many a pleasant fragrance issues from his voice. Those who are far away and those who are near, hearing his voice, follow its pleasant fragrance. Our Lord and Saviour, rising up from the dead, became a pleasant fragrance for us. Our Lord Jesus Christ, who is the true panther, draws to himself all humankind captured by the devil and held punished by death. Through his incarnation, since the panther is a beautiful animal, David said of Christ, "You are the fairest of the sons of men." Now this, of course, applies biblical commentary to it. And as you saw from that Avad de Conti gloss, the one in the Venice manuscript in his handwriting, he secularizes it completely. There is nothing about the Bible there, okay? But it's applied to the woman. And I'm now moving on to bring in John Lydgate here. I'm really glad that Joan Griffiths is here because she has written on Lydgate's use of the gloss material in her book. And so I'm avoiding the bit that she discusses. So I'm looking at the panther and the moon myself here. Because the point I want to make here is that Lydgate wrestles with trying to apply and to fit in these weird symbols, okay? And again, my argument is that the weirdness of the symbols points to in favor of my argument of common authorship, okay? So Lydgate doesn't quite know what to make of them. He adopts a belt and braces approach. In his translation, he incorporates material from the Latin glosses. In the Fairfax manuscript, he also has the Latin glosses as well. So we have the phenomenon of the material being explained in the Middle English and in the Latin gloss which accompanies the Middle English. But anyway, here is his version of the panther. In his shield, if you list it here, hath imprinted a panther, and we're told again that it's a beast of many beautiful colours and sweet breath and so forth, and so animals like to be in his company. But Lydgate just can't cope with clear, straightforward praise of women here. You have, on the other hand, and so Lydgate reads both in bono et in mano, as it were. Some folk accuse women of being like wolves, he says, in their greediness more voracious than the maw of Tysius, and more ravenous in desire than Tantalus, who is in hell, and may never eat his fill, because hunger affects him so sorely. But only fools lacking in wisdom say that about women? Oh no, don't say that about women. Sorry, I mean, yeah, believe me, this is a pretty accurate summary of the text. For women never bear malice. Then Lydgate gets back to the panther. This Indian creature does not have more colours on him than women have the flowers of the virtues. A great compliment, yes, but the reading is instantly reversed in the statement that whatever thing they want to do, without any long delay, women can find a colour with which to excuse themselves. So let no man out of malice or wickedness speak to them of duplicity. In other words, if you try to accuse a woman in those terms, you will get a right earful back. That women will always defend themselves from any such accusation. But the Shakamara Moralise stays on message. It just gives us a completely in bono reading. When goodness and beauty are accompanied by each other, it is a thing of great excellence. And here is why the panther is significant. It has a spotted skin surrounded by different colours and always gives off around him the sweet odour, such that animals by their right natures willingly follow and love him. And he is also a very compliant beast and an enemy only to dragons. So one can say in the same way that the good person, it's generalized here, is ornamented by different virtues that greatly embellish him, and he gives off around him so good and sweet an odour, i.e. For his goodness. He has such a good reputation and so much grace with everyone that he is honoured and esteemed by all. And so he shows himself good-natured and humane to all, male and female, and hated only by false deceivers and wicked evil speakers, who are like cruel dragons who destroy those who wish you the goodness with the venom they have in their tongues and teeth. Now I don't think that Lydgate had a copy of the Shakamara Moralise, but my point is that that's how he could have directed the poem had he chosen to, but he cannot resist putting in some of the negative material about womankind at that point. Anyway, moving on to the moon, and this is where it gets even more interesting. Is this a lunatic choice as a positive symbol? The first poem in the Women's Army is said here to be youth, because although in the deed of love it is fitting for both man and woman to be young, it is more fitting for it to be placed in the woman's army, because this condition in a woman has a great effect on the lover, and it is represented most fittingly by the new moon, because it grows, because in its own light it varies in multiple ways, and because it gets its light from the sun. So too, youth grows and tends always to increase, and is set in motion by many figures and movements. So that is the Venice gloss, okay? Explaining why one of the ladies' poems should have the symbol of the moon on its shield. Okay, and it continues. This age, youth, likewise usually follows the onslaughts and influence of the heart, which in the human body is just like the sun in the larger world. Hence, young men are followers of passions. Young men, as the philosopher says, Aristotle again. Also, just as the moon in a moderate time period travels through many signs, travels through many star signs, okay? Many monsters. Thus, youth travels through many dangers, etc. And at that point, the Venice gloss ends. Now let's move straight to the Shakamara Moralise here. The new moon, Evald notes, continually grows, increasing its light as it moves towards fullness, and then its light diminishes, decreasing from perfection until it is stripped of all brightness. Likewise, youth grows until it attains the perfect age of man's life, but then decreases and diminishes in respect of its corporeal disposition until it reaches the term of old age, where finally its light is extinct and all its power. The moon is also subjected to many different cosmological movements and influences, so changeable is its nature. Carrying on, the significance of the fact that the moon gets its light from the sun wasn't explained in the Venice gloss, but it is explained here. The sun is comparable to the human heart, since youth willingly follows what the heart tells and teaches it. In the little world of the human body, in the macrocosm of the human body, the heart is the king or the prince which governs its other members, just as the sun is king or prince over all the planets in the sky. In truth, young people, by their very nature, follow their heart's desires. And this is why Aristotle says young people should not be chosen to be rulers. So, okay, this is getting a bit negative, but you see that this is young people, okay? This is not an attack on womankind in general. Carrying on, the comparison of the moon to youth is further extended, and the outcome is not pleasing in moral terms at all, because Everard says, just as the moon passes through many star signs and constellations, as if encountering monsters and marvels, so also youth passes through many dangerous paths, if indeed it can succeed at all in passing through them. Therefore, reason in the Roman de la Rose, in speaking about youth, says it is a hard period to pass through without dying or breaking a limb, or bringing shame to oneself or to one's family. Youth, therefore, is very suitably signified by the new moon. Now, you see what's happening here. Avaldo Conti is focusing on youth per se. He's talking about youth in general terms, okay? The fact that this is a symbol linked to the young woman gets included here, it gets sort of left behind, really, because let's face it, I mean, applying the crescent, applying the moon, how much more changeable, how much more clear a symbol of changeability can you get than the moon? Yeah, applying this to a virtuous young woman seems not exactly the most obvious choice to make, surely. Anyway, let's get back to Evard. However much youth may sit well in respect of lovers and ladies, for love by nature is more appropriate to young people, not to others, it always seems more suitable for it to be placed in the women's battle rather than the lovers, for youth is, among other things, much noted and prized in girls, and greatly attracts and moves lovers. So this is, basically the point that men are more attracted by young women, and so that basically is why youth is in the army of the lady rather than in the army of the man. But it's weird. What we do not have in either the Venice gloss or in the Echec Moralise is the simple fact that the moon is linked with Diana, and Diana is linked with chastity. She's the goddess of chastity. Here we have a couple of illuminations from the Echec Moralise. And so elsewhere in his commentary, Evard has gone on at great length about how the moon is linked to Diana, and this is about the power of virginity. And so my point is that this underlines the fact that it's such a strange symbol, because Evard's project, which is to reconcile love with good household economics, it's all about getting women married and getting them to bear children. It's not about virginity. Yeah. So my point is that there's an internal inconsistency almost within Evard's exegesis itself, yeah, as he moves from one thing to the other. So anyway, long story short, this is a strange choice of the symbol for a virtuous young woman, yeah, and Lydgate just can't hack it. He just can't cope with it, okay? He says they're always ready, yes, for youth in its grain age, it varies in courage, ready to change, like the nature of the moon is. But women are not like that. They are stable of their very nature. So we have a denial of the applicability of the symbol of the moon to young women, where they be said they will abide, they void a change to be their guide, their sect is no thing lunatic, nor their kind they've been like. And then he just gives up and says, well, actually, it's more like the sun, really. Women are more like the sun. So he just basically gives up the use of the moon symbol and says, where are we? The cloud will a double its eclipse, may the clear light nor deface the beams brighter for truth. Right so the brecht beam is glad of her truth doth never fad. And he then goes on to say that women are more like the sun than they are of the moon. So he just gives up, basically, in trying to apply the symbol. Okay? And I should say that Lydgate, if he is indeed the author, he goes on a great length to try to fit this material in, and it doesn't really work. But my point is the fact that he has such difficulty points to something unusual about the choice of symbol. Now, I'm not saying that these symbols can't be explained in a way that they fit. My point is that we need explanation. We need to be shown how they fit. Yeah, and if you're just reading off the poem itself, you cannot get that. You need at least a gloss like you have in the Venice manuscript, or you need to have a copy of the Echec Moralise to get the full explanation. Lydgate does not want to have the phenomenon of having somebody to explain to you what the symbols mean. So he brings the gloss into the text, and he flip-flops between virtuous and negative readings of all the material. So that difficulty for me is a good argument in favour of my suspicion that the poet and the commentator are one and the same person, and that one man, or one man with a few friends, is responsible for the entire Chess of Love enterprise, which is quite an achievement, I think. It's an impressive attempt, read as a whole, at reconciling amour and économique, bringing desire within the framework of virtuous marriage, seen as the foundation of a secular economics, a secular household management, which is fully compatible with Christian doctrine, but which is essentially lay. As to the question of is the commentary a self-commentary? Probably, I think. Can't prove it, but I think it is highly likely. So, thank you. Sorry, could I just say quickly, if anybody wants to follow up, that's a short bibliography, and I've got a couple of print-offs of it as well, so if anybody is interested, please do take a copy or just take a photograph of that.
Thank you very much, Alastair, for a very rich and compelling talk. We've got a bit of time for questions. Whilst people gather their thoughts. It's kind of interesting, this idea that you talked about a poet writing as a poet, but it can be the same person,
yes,
acting as a commentator, writing, yes, like a commentator.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to think of are there any other sort of contemporary examples of commentators, yeah, doing that?
There are, well, yes, there really are several. John Gower, the Latin glosses to the Confessio Mantis, I think it's all pretty much agreed now. It wasn't always that Gower probably wrote the Latin glosses, but he speaks in the third person, in Latin. The Boccaccio self-commentary on the Teseida, third person, except for one point where he uses io. He says I, and people leap on that. But it's a fairly long commentary, but as I say, apart from one exception, he speaks in the third person. And of course, Dante, the Convivio. He doesn't ever say, I wrote this, by the way. I mean, the Convivio is the most spectacular instance of vernacular self-commentary from the later Middle Ages. And Dante is a complete pioneer here. He, in some of his earlier work, he drew on commentary material, but to have an explicit commentary on his own canzone, if we didn't know in advance that was Dante, yeah, scholars would be arguing over the issue, did Dante really write this? And people would be saying, oh, but he can't possibly have said this boring stuff about his own poem. He was the author, right? And it would have been exactly the same argument. Yeah. I mean, I know there's great debate over whether the Can Grande epistle was the work of Dante or not. And again, Italianists often use the argument that this stuff is so conventional, it's so boring, Dante could not possibly have written this about his own poem. Now, all I'm saying is that is not a good argument. Whatever else you may say about the Can Grande epistle, you can't use that one, because I don't think it's got any validity whatever. So yeah, so this is not unusual. And to complain about it being unauthorly, I think, shows, I think, a certain unwillingness to accept that when an author writes as a commentator, that's a certain kind of deal, it's a certain kind of writing that they engage with. So.
Would you say something about the combination of the references to Aristotle's ethics, rhetorics, with this kind of symbolic exegesis? What you make of it, is that, what sense does it make to you?
Oh, you mean the way that Aristotle is kind of pulled into this kind of debate?
Yes.
I think it's deeply fascinating. I think the person responsible for it largely is Giles of Rome, the De Gemini Principum, which is just such a transformative text. It's been described as Aristotle for aristocrats, which is a really neat phrase, I think. And it's all about ethics, politics, and economics, but I mean, I think my problem, I just don't think in those discussions that the pseudo-Aristotelian economics has been given the credit that is deserved. It's pseudo, let's stay with the real Aristotle. It's hard to pin down a verbal parallel with the De Regimini Principium and with the economics, but but Giles writes in a rather general, expansive way, So either he's elaborating what he found in the ethics and the politics and the De Anima, or he's been influenced by the economics. But so I'm making 2 points here: that the economics, the pseudo text, in terms of the history of marriage theory, has been hugely neglected. Its influence just hasn't been properly investigated. I also want to give credit for Giles of Rome for going along the same lines, but I can't prove that Giles of Rome was using the Economica, but I think it's a strong likelihood because these people read those texts all together, as it were. So really what's happening is that Eduardo Conti is following in the footsteps of Giles of Rome, but he's taking on the Romance of the Rose and Andreas Capellanus and trying to put it together in some way. Not a perfect fit, not a very good fit, but if you have the idea that there can be true friendship in married love, that true love is compatible with marriage, contra Andreas, then in a sense, Finamore, the attempt is how do you justify, theorize Finamore, and hey, Aristotle is the answer. So it seems strange that he should be pulled in to this debate, but that is what they did, and we see the impact of that in other debates, in other discussions, other presentations of moral philosophy, as we have in Gower, for example. I should say that anybody interested in the term honest, as applied to honest love, which Gower uses, Eduardo Conti uses it again and again. This idea of honesty in love, it's in Eduardo Conti. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a direct source here, but my point is that this notion of honest love seems to have been a cultural phenomenon of the late 14th century, occurring in texts in both English and French. This is material that those who debated heatedly the issue of Andreas in the last century just didn't really get into, though there are a few precocious articles which do speak about Gower's honest love, but say it as something of a peculiarity. My point is that it's much more mainstream. So you're looking at an attempt then to reconcile, not to reconcile, but to juxtapose, is a better word, to juxtapose of it with material that speaks in favour of virtuous marriage, and they use Aristotle for that purpose.
So following on from that, I was going to ask about Aristotle and pseudo-Aristotle. So Nicola Wren, is he questioning the authenticity of the text in any way, and how is he annotating the text? I assume he's getting it originally from Arabic.
No, he's actually working off a Latin translation from
originally from Arabic.
Yeah.
Yes. How is he putting it in terms of sort of? He and everybody else in the period, more or less, they will assume that this is the authentic Aristotle. Okay.
They don't question its inauthenticity. I can't remember, once I knew this, when the questions begin to be asked, but not in the 14th century. They all think it's the real Aristotle. So they respect the economics as much as they do the ethics and the politics. And my point is, so should we in trying to understand this material. So,
and how is it then accommodated by Nicole or you mentioned that he's expanding it quite a lot in his translation commentary.
Yes, it's a remarkable translation plus commentary, and it's published in one of those ancient Roxburgh Club publications, which one can download entirely, which I did, and there's also a modern English translation as well. So no excuses for not reading this. It's a superb scholarly resource. But no, I mean, Arem, as I trust we all know, is such a fantastic translator and commentator of the real Aristotle, as it were, and he thought he was continuing in this same way. And Avada Conti is very much following in his footsteps, because Avada Conti, I mean, he thought the problematta was the real Aristotle. He didn't have any doubts about its authenticity. And the problematta is one of the most influential texts in terms of medical theory. So Avada Conti writes this massive commentary, which is available in two fat manuscripts in his own hand, and which is being edited. Volume 1 is forthcoming, but it's really a daunting project given the sheer length of the thing. So it might have been that Avada Conti was just one of those folk that just was too ambitious, just took on two big projects and didn't quite finish any of them. So he didn't quite finish the original poem, or he never quite finished the commentary on the poem either. Sorry, it's slightly frivolous, but that's one explanation. As I say, we don't know if the poem was ever ended, because we don't have a complete manuscript of the entire poem, unfortunately. But historically, this is really why I chose it for this particular group, is here we have, let me get this right, the first French academic style commentary on a poem written originally in French. So that's an historical first. Okay. So,
I suppose I was thinking about that. I'm also very intrigued by the idea that Everard consciously chooses to write in two different voices.
yes.
And then intrigued by the fact that for Lydgate, it seems more possible to fuse those voices
Yes.
in a single poem. And I suppose I was wondering whether you have any sense of whether for Everard it's a question of available models, whether he feels that it's not possible to fuse them, or there's a model of poetry where the commentary would not be appropriate?
Yes. No, it's a really very good question, and I suppose all I can say is that obviously, if you're thinking of how priests are instructing layfolk, they are trying to explain the Bible to them. Well, there you have use of an intermediary, the person who has the information and can pass it on, in some way. So arguably, this is a expansion, transference, whatever word you want to use, of that kind of technique, But it raises a very important question. I mean, how would the original poem have been performed? When you get to the moon, would somebody have said, "Stop there, this means," and you would have had an intervention, instant gloss, as it were, being thrown in there, or would you just have carried on? Because you can't tell what the moon's meant to mean unless you have the gloss, you see. And Lydgate wants a poem complete in itself. The trouble is he goes too far, I think. So, sorry, I'm being rather rude to him, perhaps. But I mean, he might have been content with using the in bono material from the Latin glosses, and putting that into the poem, that would have filled it out enough so that a reader could have made sense of the whole thing, But he can't stop there. He goes on kind of autopilot and goes on to bring in the negative material at great length, because the text expands hugely at those moments.
Yes, and also fascinating that he nonetheless replicates the Latin glosses in the margins.
Yes.
So you get both the expansion within the text and the original gloss alongside the text.
Yes, or at least we assume that he was responsible, for having the glosses put in the text alongside his poem. He just might have said, "Hey, why did you put the glosses here? I've already explained it." But obviously, one can't tell. But as I say, there isn't anything in the Latin gloss that isn't in his translation. It's all there. So he incorporates the whole thing. But he then goes on this riff about the vagaries of womanhood, which is not quite the point of the original at all. So it's just very strange. But my point is that you can see a poet trying to to make the poem self-sufficient, yeah, in a way that the original is not. But rather than just doing what is basically minimally required to make it work, he does. But on the other hand, and he quotes these contrary authorities there. So very confusing. But hang on a minute. Okay, we're talking about the lady here. Yeah, this is the ladies' army in the Battle of Love, and you're unloading all this negative stuff about women, huh? But of course, reason and sensuality, it's only a partial translation of a small part of the whole thing, obviously. So it does, I guess, have its own integrity, I think, really. But that's only because it's only a small part of it. If he had done more, the awkwardness would have become more obvious, I think. At least we assume that he hasn't done more. We don't know. But for me, this raises all kinds of interesting questions about the relationship of the text and the gloss. And this notion, as you said, also speaking in two voices, so to speak. And we have the authoritarian Latin voice in the Gower glosses, which contrasts often with the Middle English material in John Gower's poem, for example. We actually have that. And in the Tisaida, well, of course, we have the famous example of the account of the two Venuses in Boccaccio's commentary on the Tisaida. Again, that really is very famous because the poem itself is really all about love and sex and so forth, and it's all about pleasure and pleasurable sex, whereas if you look at the commentary, it gets very moralistic at that point. So how were they used in performances of the poem itself? I can see different, and one can only imagine this, can't you? One might see a performance being just for fun, a pleasant, jolly account of the romps going on in the poem itself, and then in a more straight-laced context, somebody might have said, well, this proves that, and you would have had a moral commentary. Okay, this is just a story. Don't do this at home.